How is everybody doing out there? I came on a little bit before the breakdown of the music. There we go. Samantha. Mike Umbry. Way to go, Kennels. Hey, what's going on, Bubba? Scratch and Boat on the go. TGD, thank you for coming by, Chappy. Oh, yeah, thank you very much. Hey, Cherry. I'm not doing well, Lamau. Aw, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm not doing well either. I mean, healthy, yeah. But more on that later, I guess. I hope everyone is doing wonderfully. How am I? I'm alright. I'm healthy. Hey, Andiri. Yo, Chapster doing dishes and turning in. I hope everything goes better. I'm doing hot also. I just got out of the shower. So you notice my hair's all, well, you can barely. Let's see, hold it up in front of my face. There you go. Hey, Sleek. A bunch of faces I hadn't seen in a while. Not doing well, I mean, but who is? Glad to hear. Nobody is saying, oh, I'm sorry to hear that, buddy. Yeah. No, my Mustang's on its last legs driving, so I don't know what I'm going to do for now. But, oh, shoot. Got my mind on putting these little things on the bristles of my brush. But yeah, I don't know. It's whatevers. Maybe we can do some spoopy stories. Creepypasta. Let's go to Reddit. No slep. No slep. I'm dying to hear some spoops. I'm glad. No, I'm a goofball. Oh wow, this guy's still doing there's a strange newspaper that's only delivered at midnight. He's up to part 9. Hey, Alice. Let me see if I can find your story. Where would I find that? Let me see here. Do 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 do. Y'all can't hear the music. I can. I could turn it up for y'all while I try to find the story. Can't stay too long. It's super late. Then I'm not doing your story tonight. Methinks. Or I do your story and then you watch it when you wake up tomorrow. It's up to you. You let me know. I don't know. Well, I'll have to let her watch it on the flippity floppity because I've been leaving this cliffhanger too long. I had to switch my keyboard out because I spilled beer on it. There it is. We got some Burt's Bees here. You know it's Burt's Bees. Got two little buzzes right there and there. You see them? They just look like ants, but they're not ants. They're buzzes. They're bees. You should be friendly to bees. They give you delicious Burt's Bees for your lips. Anyways. Read it quick then. Oh. Let me see. Well, all right. We'll get to the story. Let me turn the music down. All right. Well, this story is about a couple that went to Pikes Peak. They heard some pretty... I'll give you the TLDR, the too long didn't read. Here it is. Last month, my fiance Faye and I went to her parents' cabin up in Pikes Peak, Colorado. It had a set of extremely weird and terrifying experiences. We found an old dream catcher on a tree in the woods out back. And at night, a series of unsettling voices calling out from the forest. At first, we thought someone was messing with us, but then the voices began to take on recognizable traits. We heard Faye's grandfather calling out for help. He's been dead since 2012. My mother laughing. She lives 700 miles away. Faye got sick and began talking in her sleep. And at one point, the voice of a woman outside began to repeat some of the things that Faye was mumbling, as though they were communicating. So there we are. I think we stopped at 14. This goes up to 16, so we got 3 more stories to go. The last time I updated, Faye's older sister Becca came to visit. Let me give you all the links. There you go. Last time I updated, Faye's older sister Becca came to visit us with her infant son Caleb. The presence of the child seems to have awakened something in Faye, because her sleep disturbances have become more erratic, and her unusual behavior has intensified. They stayed for almost a week, but left abruptly after a weird experience with Faye. Becca seemed to be growing angry with Faye over the course of a few days, although I could never really discern why. One night, when Faye was asleep, Becca and I sat on the couch and talked about what had happened. And I asked her why she seemed so hostile towards her sister that day. She wouldn't even speak to her. And Becca replied that Faye really has a problem letting things go. If she's mad at someone, she's mad for weeks. If she's hurt for years. She can't forgive and she can't forget. Hey, Foxies. I asked, did you do something to make her mad? Are you two fighting? Becca denied that they were having any sort of conflict and said that she was just speaking in general terms. Having grown up with Faye, I asked if there was something in the past that made Faye angry, and Becca sharply responded, "Nobody did anything to Faye. Nothing happened to her." At that point, she stood up and went upstairs, claiming she needed to check on Caleb. closed the door without saying goodnight. Faye is sometimes difficult to handle because she's proud and stubborn, and the strongest person I've ever met. Hey, Jessica. But her sister is like an obsidian wall. You can't get any information out of her. You can't read her poker face. You can't know what she's really thinking ever. But I know that she knows something. And maybe I can't get it out of her, but I figured I'd be able to get it out of her mom. Becca, Faye's mom, Laura, agreed to Skype chat with me this week. This time, I'm going for the throat. I successfully removed all the vomit stains from the house, so Faye isn't talking to them in the dark anymore, but she's still getting worse. I feel like she's slipping away. Seeing Faye holding Caleb on the couch with her eyes rolled back in her head and smiling was one of the most disturbing memories I have of this entire ordeal. There's something about Faye and that child that deeply unsettles me. I've been keeping quiet and trying to make sure that Caleb is safe. I have no reason to believe that Faye would ever hurt another person, except for the one time in college when she punched out a drunk girl at a party for grabbing my ass and saying, "I'd hit it." But as far as animals and kids go, Faye's angelic. The night that Becca stormed off to bed mid-conversation, Faye did something odd. I woke up to her mumbling in the dark, and when I turned on the light, she was standing at the far end of the room, cradling a pillow in her arms and swaying it back and forth, half singing a lullaby. The words were unrecognizable, but the melody sounded distantly familiar. I called out to her and asked, "Sweetie, what are you doing?" She replied in a low, grumbling voice, "I always wanted a big sister." Her speech was slurred. She sounded drugged. That didn't sound slurred. You should put that before. Whatever. I got up and gently ushered her back to bed and took the pillow away. When I did, she said, "Now I want to be a mommy." I rubbed her neck and assured her that I would start a family with her someday and that she would be a great mother. She mumbled, "He's a little corpse." I asked her, what do you mean?" But she never replied. She just started that rhythmic breathing that lets you know your partner is fast asleep. Angela visited our house again the next evening, just after the sun went down. For those of you who don't recall, Angela belonged to the Shonaho tribe in California and is the daughter of a very important tribal elder. She visited me and Faye and I, grammar, when we got back to California and told us that a malevolent spirit called the Hollow One was infatuated, words are hard, with my fiance. She said that there was a dark cloud over Faye that could not be easily removed. This time Angela brought her friend, who is a hypnotist, and they inspected the house and the yard. We told them about the barf stains, and Faye's claimed that he's in the stains. He gets up at night and walks around in the dark. Then in private, I told her about baby Caleb's presence and how it exacerbated Faye's behavior. I also showed them where I found the new dream catcher. Angela said the entity has many names and it's known to several different Native American groups. It is older than the skinwalkers, and the progenitor of many evil spirits that inhabit different places near the Rocky Mountains and the Southwest. Her friend referred to it as a soul trader that snatches up a person's essence, takes it down into the dark, then enters the remaining body to seek out more victims. I don't know where the dark is, but allegedly, that's where Faye's headed. With too much, both Faye and I had become tainted by it. This is why we were vomiting dark bile. The stains still carried remnants of that evil. Angela spoke with Faye for a long time and concluded that she was still Faye, but on her way to somewhere else. She's making a spiritual journey into a place that she thinks is good and safe, but in reality is being coaxed out of this world. Despite what has happened to us, a lot of this whimsical, metaphysical talk is sometimes hard for me to swallow. But the hypnotist session with Faye did a good job of convincing me that there's something here, inside my house with us, always watching. What's up, Christian? The hypnotist and Faye lie in our bed. We brought chairs from the dining room upstairs to sit with her. She put her hand on Faye's forehead and hummed a chant for a while, then covered Faye's ears with her palm and asked her a few questions. There were things like, "What's your name? Who's your fiancé?" All of Faye's answers were normal. Then the hypnotist hummed some more and lifted her hand. Faye's eyes were rolled back in her head, which only happens when she is in a sleepwalking state. Her mouth was twitching a little bit. The hypnotist asked, "Who are you?" She responded, "I am Faye." The important parts of this conversation went a bit like this. "Faye, can you tell us who is in this house?" Faye raised her arms slowly and pointed each person in the room out and said their name. Even though she was not looking at them, she knew where everyone was. Felix, Becca, Angela, you. Then she pointed at the wall and said, "Caleb." He was in the other room. The hypnotist asked, "Is there anyone else? What about the man who's been following you?" She shook her head and said, "Not now, he's outside." We all glanced out the window to the tree line where I'd first seen the figure walking back and forth in the middle of the night, mimicking Faye's sleepwalking. This time, there was no one there. Angela replied, "What does he say to you? Is he talking to you right now?" Faye replied, "I can't hear him. He's facing the other way." The hypnotist asked, "And what are the dream catchers for? Who makes them?" Faye did not respond. She smiled a little bit. I butted in and said, "Honey, I found your hair wrapped in the dream catcher outside. Did you do that?" She put her finger to her lips and shushed me. Then put her palm flat against the wall, like she was feeling for a pulse. After a few moments, said, "He's here." Right when she finished the sentence, Caleb burst into tears. Becca and Angela rushed out of the room to go check on him. The hypnotist and I remained with Faye. The hypnotist finally went for broke and said, "Faye, sweetie, you wrote the number 5 on the window in the other room. You wrote it backwards. Why did you do that? What does it mean? Did you write it for someone outside to see?" In that moment, Faye's eyes rolled forward, and her little green irises finally showed. She immediately looked towards the door that led into the hall and said, "No, no, he's listening now." Then she began hyperventilating and struggled to speak the words, "He'll find out." The last thing she said was, "Felix," my name, in a deep, guttural voice. It wasn't her own. Then the hypnotist pressed her hand against Faye's eyes and spoke aloud a command in her native language. I think it was Shoshone, but not actually sure what group she's affiliated with. Faye immediately woke up and seemed confused about where she was, then started crying and reached out for me. I hurried over and held her in my arms. Her body was so cold, it was like a corpse. When she was crying, she said, "He wants to kill you. He wants you dead. I saw you in the trees." Angela and the hypnotist, I haven't given her name, by the way, because I don't want you to have to memorize a million names, heard around the house, blessed it in burning sage, then also recommended I call a Catholic priest for Faye's personal comfort since she is Catholic. They left after a few words of parting, and Becca seemed really angry and scared at this point. She remained in her room for the rest of the night. I got a call about an hour later from Angela, who told me that she had discussed the situation with the hypnotist and that they believed Faye is in extreme denial about something, perhaps some sort of trauma. And they said that she had repressed it so well that I was consigned to a place in her subconscious that only years of therapy or hypnotism could unearth. It was in a place in her mind that cannot even be accessed by talking to her in her sleep. That's where the number 5 rests, and that's why the entity hasn't found it, despite communicating with Faye in her sleep virtually every night. He's drilling her brain like miners digging for gold. And the fun didn't end there. We all went to sleep pretty early that night because of all the drama. But as I've also learned so many other occasions, going to sleep upset usually results in a night terror or some other sleep disturbance for Faye. At about 2 a.m., she leaped out of bed, jolting me awake in the process, and bombed down the hall like there was a fire. She started bashing her fist against the door in the guest room, but didn't utter a single word. Her eyes were shut. I flicked on the light and stood there in the hall for just a second, scared stiff. But when baby Caleb started crying, I snapped out of it and rushed over. I bear hugged my fiancée to try to get her to stop making so much noise. In return, she tried to bite me. Faye has never been violent towards me in real life, even in her sleep. She is always very passive as a sleepwalker. Creepy, but passive. This time she was trying to rip my throat out. She's trying to draw blood. I fended her off and sort of apprehended her, then walked her back to the bedroom. She was basically wearing me like a straitjacket. When I carefully put her back in bed, she whispered, You'll go up in the trees. He went down in the hole. Becca was understandably furious the next day, but she swallowed her anger and drove Faye down to the Catholic church at the town center. I went to work. Apparently, they finally got one of the priests to agree to visit next week to bless the house. They explained that this wouldn't be enough. So he said he'd speak with the bishop of his diocese, that it could take a while. That evening, Becca informed me that she had changed her flight. She now intended to leave in 2 days. I begged her to set aside the differences with Faye and try to get through it with her. Or through to her. I said Faye needs her big sister right now, but Becca wouldn't budge. She seems to be holding a monolithic grudge about something neither of them will tell me. I ordered pizza, Faye's favorite, in a lame attempt at lightening the mood around the house. But the two would only have casual, light conversation with each other, and the tension in the house was so thick I could feel it in my stomach. Faye and I retired to our room early and watched Game of Thrones in bed. She always recorded it on Sunday because Faye is at work, and then we watch it during the week. I asked her if she remembered telling me that the imposter wanted me dead, or that I was going to be put up in the trees. She said she didn't recall anything like that, but that she did have a dream about seeing me impaled on a tree branch high up in the air. She said my skin and hair were missing. Faye fell asleep pretty quickly, but I couldn't sleep at all. I remembered that Nathan, Taiwei's son, had left me a voicemail a few days prior, and that I had forgotten to call him back. So I grabbed my phone and went downstairs. The house was quiet. Becca and Caleb were already asleep upstairs. I turned the TV on low to mask the conversation with Nathan. It was midnight in Colorado, but he answered the phone and asked me how everything was going. I told him everything. Nathan had a lot to say. He apologized for making me and Faye sick, but said that a simple purge process was very common treatment for many physical and spiritual maladies in his tribe. However, by my description of the barf stain events, it obviously did not work, and we were still under the influence of the imposter. He said if we came back to Colorado, he would bring us to the elders of his community and request that they perform a more serious healing ritual. I told him that would be Faye's call entirely, but I doubt she would go, or the imposter would let her. Last month, when I was in the cabin by myself, there was a blizzard that shut down the only road down the mountain. The ranger couldn't come up to check on me, but Taiwei and Nathan, being the badass gentlemen they are, actually hiked up the mountain through the snow and checked on me. You can read that story at the bottom of this post if you haven't. There's a couple stories back. But basically, on their hike back down, they heard Faye's voice calling out to them from inside one of the abandoned mines on Pikes Peak. Taiwei went to investigate and was dragged into the dark by an unseen creature or animal. Nathan eventually found him dead, and parts of his skin had been flayed. The reason that I hadn't been able to get a hold of Nathan for several weeks was because he had a group of men from his community went a group of men from his community went back to Pikes Peak to investigate the circumstances of his father's death and explore the cabin. They camped for a few nights, even spent one night in the woods next to the cabin. Nathan heard Tyway's voice calling out for help over and over, crying and speaking Nathan's name. However, occasionally that voice would cry out in Zuni, which is a language that some Pueblo tribes speak, but their tribe does not. They speak Hopi, so Nathan was fairly certain that this was not, in fact, his father. They also heard children weeping in the forest. One of Nathan's friends left the tent to go take a piss, and he claims he saw a naked child with grayish skin standing a dozen yards off, facing away, looking up at the trees. He looked like a stiff corpse that was standing high up on the balls of his feet. This sight apparently scared Nathan's friend so bad he took off. He grabbed his things and went to hike back down the mountain, in the dark, in the cold, by himself. Nathan and the others tried to stop him, but it was too dangerous to go after him. They haven't seen him since. Nathan told me that he had reoccurring dreams of a child while on the mountain, of a child and of Faye. He said to me, "Tell me about the child, Felix." During our conversation, I'd been standing in the living room facing the sliding glass door, looking out into the backyard. Right when Nathan said, "Tell me about the child," I saw a large shadow move behind the orange tree outside. I told Nathan to hold on a second and went to grab the flashlight from the kitchen. When I got there, I almost collapsed in fright. The front door was wide open. From my front door, you can see the tree line across the street. Someone was walking behind the trees. I could see them moving slowly between them. I set down the phone and ran upstairs to wake Faye and Becca. But Faye wasn't in bed. I frantically rushed to Becca's room to see if Faye was with her, but Becca was fast asleep and was really disturbed by my urgency when I woke her up. We turned on the light and she went to grab Caleb, but he wasn't in the little crib Faye had brought for him. He was gone. Becca turned into the Hulk in about 0.5 seconds flat. She started shrieking in rage and terror, screaming, "Where is he? Where is my baby?" over and over again. We dashed around the house looking for Faye and Caleb, but couldn't find them. Then I realized that she had taken him outside. We ran out there barefoot straight to the trees and came up behind Faye. My fiancée was still. Becca grabbed Caleb out of Faye's hands and shoved her to the ground, then took the baby back inside. I picked Faye up and rushed her back into the house. Neighbors were starting to come out of their house to see what all the commotion was. Faye woke up on her way back up the stairs and broke down crying, apologizing to both of us. Becca packed her things and stormed out of the house, grabbing Faye's car keys, and drove off. The police showed up within a few minutes later, and I had to explain to them that the sisters had a big fight that got taken outside. I said that Faye was drunk, so she took it a bit far and ran off across the street. Thankfully, nobody saw the baby, so I didn't get arrested for child endangerment. What else could I have said? They'd never have believed me if I told them the truth. They checked Faye out to make sure she hadn't gotten beat up, and I asked her repeatedly if I treated her all right. They left. Becca drove straight to the airport. Faye and I had to go pick up the car the next day. I've got a Skype chat scheduled with Faye's mom tomorrow. Becca texted me and said, "Ask her about 5, she knows." If I get answers out of her, I'll post a brief update here, but I won't be able to make a post for a while. I'm sorry. Thank you all for the support over the past month. Now I need to try to put a broken pieces of my home life back together. These are really freaking long now. This is another one. Alright, if y'all give me a second, I'm going to take a potty break. Turn the music up a little bit. Hi, Misty Doggy. Are y'all enjoying the stories? What happened to the music paused? Great. Because this hit the keyboard. I'm sorry about that, guys. Aww. I've now begun to dig them up, is the title of this one. I'm sorry for the length of this post. It is enormous. I actually had to split it in two because of Reddit's word count limit. But this is, for better or worse, the end has finally come. Sorry. After I post the other half of this update in a few days, I will never speak of these events again. I've lost far too much, and it hurts me too deeply to continue. How about you go to the next story, you psycho? Jeez. It's been a long time since I talked about my fiancée and the events surrounding our vacation at her parents' cabin in Colorado. But I think enough time has passed. Let me see. I don't know how much time's passed. I have finally unearthed the secrets of Faye's family and what they've been hiding from me. No Sleep has been remarkably supportive. So even now, what I'm about to tell you is deeply personal. You've helped us this far. You deserve to know what I've found. We moved 2 weeks ago. I got a new job a few towns over. It's only an hour's drive from our old place, and it's the same distance from Faye's work, but in the opposite direction. As if by the law of horror film cliches, the strange activity that plagued us at night ceased entirely for a week when we moved into our new place. However, it started up again for a while, just as I feared it might. Our new home has not been blessed by Angela when the activity started up again. She's the daughter of a Shoshone tribal elder who saged and blessed our old home a few weeks prior. The Aten Kogua, the imposter, has not given up on Faye. Its game is to wear us down until we give up. New house. I had a Skype chat set up with Faye's very reticent mother. But per no sleep warnings, I've waited until after we move. The fear was that Laura might divulge something over Skype that the imposter could use against us. The more it discovers about us, the more closely it can mimic me and any of Faye's family members, living or dead. When she is asleep, Faye is highly susceptible to suggestion. The running hypothesis no sleep has developed as that there are certain things the imposter needs to know about Faye in order to fully infiltrate her, to control her, to kill her. We don't really know what it plans to do, but we do know that it's especially curious about the significance of the number 5, which Faye drew on a window while sleepwalking. She gets agitated anytime 5 is brought up, but cannot coherently explain why. I think that once it learns the meaning of the number, it will have full access to Faye and will be able to do whatever it's planning to do to her. I sat on the couch with my laptop and Skyped Laura around 10 p.m. one night in our new place, about half an hour after Faye had fallen asleep. I had to be extremely aggressive in order to break Laura's wall of lies about her family's past. And just when she seemed ready to crack, Faye walked out of the bedroom. We now live in a 1-story house. It was dark in the hall, so she scared the living shit out of me when I saw movement out the corner of my eye. She stood there in the dark shadows, rigid and still. Her entire body was stiff. Her head was craned all the way back in a painful position. Her chin pointed at the ceiling. Her arms were straight up in the air. Hallelujah gesture. She hadn't sleepwalked in a while now, so I immediately told Laura I'd call her back and jumped up. Faye shushed me and wiggled her fingers, arms still outstretched. She looked like a praying mantis in response. In riposte, I asked Faye, "What is it?" She smiled and replied, "Did you know about her?" She closed her hands, and one of her fingers pointed at the ceiling. I didn't know what she was talking about and asked, "What? No what?" I looked up at the ceiling and saw nothing. Faye paused. She typically pauses for long periods between sentences while sleep talking, and said, "There's an old woman up there. She lives in the attic. She's so friendly. She remembered my birthday." My skin crawled and it felt like insects skittering under my clothes. And when she said that, Faye says a lot of disturbing things. I've grown used to it, but occasionally she still surprises me. I asked her more about this old woman and said, "She sleeps right above our bed." Faye brought her arms down to her sides and her muscles relaxed. She stopped answering my questions. I walked her back to the bedroom and gently tucked her in. That night I lay awake in the dark, staring up at the ceiling. I imagined the corpse of an old woman stuck inside the drywall or dangling from the rafters in the attic. I could not shake the feeling that our unwanted guest had moved in with us and was now pretending to be a friendly stranger to trick Faye. That night I dreamed of a dark stain spreading itself out across the ceiling in the shape of a large man, just like the vomit stains in our old house a few weeks prior. As I was falling asleep, I thought I heard something heavy dragging itself around up there. Faye's mother. Laura called the following evening. Faye wasn't home from work yet, so we had a good hour-long conversation before things got uncomfortable. I had to spend a lot of time getting her back into the emotional space where she could open up about her daughter. And yet Faye claimed that she had never been there before. Ever. In reality, Faye went there a few times as a child, but her last visit was at age 5. She and her father Greg were outside building a snowman, but then Faye walked to the tree line and began speaking with someone that Greg could not see. She spoke her own name and said a few other things Greg couldn't hear, then had some sort of seizure and became catatonic. When she came to, she cried for hours, but there was apparently more to the story. Just as Faye got home from work and walked in the door, I heard Laura say, a few months before that, I was pregnant. The second I covered the mouthpiece and said, "Hi, sweetie," Laura hung up the phone. I kept this revelation to myself for a while. Laura did not return my calls after Faye went to bed, so I never found out what happened to her pregnancy. Did she have a miscarriage, an abortion? Did she give the baby up for adoption? Was it not Greg's child? Millions of questions swarmed in my mind. I didn't sleep at all. I could barely hide my thoughts from Faye. She knew something was wrong. She's quite perceptive and can read me like a book. But I acted like I had a stomach ache and went to bed. That night I had an absolutely terrible dream. Probably the worst one I've ever had in it. In it, an adult Faye attached. Try that again. An adult Faye attacked her pregnant mother. She was sleepwalking, but screaming wildly and pummeling her mother, just like she had pummeled the guest bedroom door when her sister and infant nephew, Becca and Caleb. There was blood everywhere in the dream, and Faye ran off into the woods with the fetus. It was so violent I had jolted awake, nearly screaming. When I woke up, Faye was sitting upright in bed, staring out the window. She was awake, I could tell because her posture was normal, and her eyes weren't rolled back into her head or blissfully sealed shut. She said, "Did you hear it too?" It took me a while to figure out where I was. When I saw her sitting there in a pristine white t-shirt, I sighed in relief. There was no blood anywhere. It was just a dream. Before I could answer her question, I heard a baby crying. We live in a bigger suburban neighborhood now, so it was entirely possible that it was just a sound from one of the nearby houses. But Faye's reaction to it really disturbed me. The look on her face made me think the sound was causing her physical pain. She cringed and shut her eyes, trying not to cry. I cupped her face in my hands and told her it was okay, but as I did, another voice rang out from the dark. It was a little girl, and she was speaking as if to a baby. From what I could hear, she said, "When do we go inside?" "Up in the trees where?" Starting to cry. "Not in the hole. Not down there." Faye started crying too. I looked out the window but couldn't see anything. She had no explanations for why she was so upset other than, "He's back. He's here. I know it's him." I didn't want to scare her, but I completely agreed. Conversation with Nathan. I had a missed call from Nathan the next morning when I woke up. It was Saturday, and Faye and I had plans to go get the new furniture at IKEA. While she was in the shower, I returned Nathan's call. He answered on the first ring. He sounded terrible, and the first thing he said was, "Felix, do you know anything about the child?" A few weeks prior, he said, "Tell me about the child." And I had no idea what he was talking about. Now, I had a pretty clear idea. So I whispered to him that Faye's mother had been pregnant when Faye was 5, but I had no idea what became of the baby. He told me to get as much information from Laura as possible, at all costs, but to keep it from Faye. He also told me that he was going to mail us a special herbal mixture, mugwort, damina, and kaleazaka something, to make into tea before bed. He said it promotes good dreams, and there would shield us from the imposter's intrusions. I'm hungry. I asked Nathan to explain what he'd meant. He said, very simply, the Atan Anagoga does not read minds, it reads dreams. This was an astonishing revelation to me. It explained so much about the cabin. The imposter mimicked Faye's grandfather because she had probably had a dream about him in the cabin. And it mimicked my mother for some reason. It mimicked the people that Greg saw die in the war because he frequently had nightmares about them. The former owner of the cabin, Jennifer,
heard her dead daughter's voice in the forest at night because she regularly dreamed about her. Who wouldn't have painful dreams of their own child who passed away? The creature mimics the people it learns about through the dreams of its victims, and repeats them in the forest to coax the victims words are hard to coax the victims outside. It also listens to things people say while they're awake. This is why unrecognizable and familiar voices at the same time. Some of the voices belong to other victims. That thing wanders around in the dark, learning from its targets, sharpening its skills, and pretending. This is how it hunts. So since I was getting nearer to the significance of the number 5, the information the imposter so desperately sought, Faye was in greater danger. My own dreams could betray our safety. Nathan continued that I'm just paraphrasing because I can't remember everything verbatim. Faye is the most fascinating person the Atan Anakoga has ever encountered. Her dreams are mysterious to it. She is a puzzle to be solved. And most of all, when it speaks to her in her dreams, she speaks back. My guess, you could say, is that a very dark fixation with her, perhaps even love. A putrid form of it anyways. It was true. Faye mirrored the imposter's darkness. When it looked into her, I didn't find all the hopes and dreams and fears it saw in others. Instead, it saw a deep well of impenetrable blackness. It knew there was something hidden beneath it. Whatever it plans to do with the information it seeks. I know that 5 is the light that will reveal the bottom of the well and everything inside. Cold sweat matted every inch of my skin during the conversation. I pressed the phone tight to my ear as not to miss a word. I asked, why does it even need Faye to find the answer? Her parents probably know the number means too. Nathan said something in his native language, as though he was speaking to a person sitting in the room with him. He then said, her parents haven't been to the cabin a very long time. Its connection to them is weak. Maybe it can't keep hold of someone very long, if they aren't on the mountain. After all, Faye has had her sleep disorder since she first went to Pikes Peak. But as the years passed, this entity faded from her life. It only returned when she came back. I heard the shower turn off, the glass door slid open, and Faye began moving around in the bathroom. I walked outside onto the patio and closed the door behind me. But what does that mean, Nathan? I asked. I mean, once it learns everything it needs, what does it plan to do? Nobody will give me a straight answer. Again, Nathan said something I could not understand. He was talking to someone else, perhaps one of the elders of his community. It is one of the old evils, he said. Our people have believed in them since the beginning. When a person dies, sometimes they become a, what do you call them? A wraith? A haunting. But these entities were long before. So many horror films Faye and I had cheerfully watched came flooding back to my mind. Oh, so like a demon, I said? I can't tell you how many movies I had seen where a family finds out that the ghost in their house is actually a demon. And for a few obscure reasons, that's much worse. I felt like I was about to be given that speech. Nathan cleared his throat. Well, no, not exactly. We do not believe in hell, nor any equivalent place. Our interpretation of the other worlds is very complex. But basically, this type of entity, they take you away. Not your body, your spirit. They take you into the dark, away from this world and its light. So far away. Eternities upon eternities away. The distance drives your spirit completely mad, and then you become one of them. That's what it does. He separates you from where you're supposed to be in afterlife. It steals from you yourself. So yeah, good news all around. I also asked Nathan how he was coping with his father's death and pointed out that he sounded especially dreary today. Again, I expressed my condolences and said that I was most honored to have known Taiwei and that he were alive and that we were alive because of him. Nathan replied that he knows his father's spirit lives on through his family and in the sacred earth where they live. For that reason, he does not mourn his death. However, Nathan also said something that made my hand go cold as I clutched the phone. He said, I kept having the same nightmare every night. It keeps me awake. More in his language to whoever was in the room with him, and then he paused. He finally sighed and said, You might be right, but it really feels like him. I made him promise not to go back to the cabin. He agreed and said that he'd call me in a few days. I thanked him again for his father's sacrifice. Why am I losing viewers? It says I only have 4 people in the chat. What happened? Oh no, my internet's going out. Oh, how much of the story have y'all missed so far? I really do apologize, guys. I don't know where everybody... Oh, now it says I have 8 viewers. I don't know what's happening. We're not done with the story. And I've got to tell my camera to stop. It keeps... I apologize, guys. I don't know what's going on with this internet. My camera keeps autofocusing. Oh. Does it not let me configure video? Nope. Well, it's going to keep doing that. This chapter's called The Secrets Unraveled. A few days passed in relative peace. Laura did not return my calls, and Becca, Faye's sister, did not return my text. The standoffishness of this family drives me insane. When Faye and I got home from doing groceries one evening, a package had arrived in the mail. It contained the herbs Nathan and I had talked about, with instructions on how to make it into tea. "Not too much," read the little note. Faye brewed some of it up and drank it. And when she finished it, I jokingly told her, "Actually, we're sending you on a vision quest. This is going to be really intense." She wasn't amused. We both slept soundly that night. No bad dreams. No strange activity outside. No weird sounds. The next morning, there was a knock at the door. So light, it only woke me up. I'm the light sleeping insomniac of the family. Yay. I snuck out of bed trying not to wake Faye and crept to the front door. It was Laura. She had come to our new home, totally unannounced, uninvited. I immediately knew there was about to be a shitstorm. I couldn't begin to imagine what she was doing here, but I knew by the look on her face that there was trouble. I invited her inside and informed her that Faye was still sleeping. She was actually relieved and said she wanted to talk to me alone. From her bags, she produced a photo album. We sat on the couch, where she quietly apologized to me for everything, for being constantly evasive, for lying, and for letting us go to that cabin in the first place. I waved away her ramblings and demanded to know the purpose of her visit. I had absolutely had enough of this and wanted to get to the bottom of things. Laura dropped her voice to a whisper and opened the photo album. As she turned the pages, I realized that it was actually a scrapbook, a very elaborate one that had taken years of effort to construct. There were photos, drawings, designs, letters, postcards, even a necklace with some flattened flowers. I saw pictures of Faye I had never seen before. She was absolutely adorable as a child. Her glowing smile poked out beneath the little strawberry locks in her photo. After photo. Laura said, "This is what I wanted to show you. I don't know how to talk to Faye about it." I was amazed. It took expert handiwork to craft something like this. "You made this?" I asked. She flipped further into the scrapbook and revealed a few old pictures of herself in the later stages of pregnancy. The centerpiece of one of the pages was a photograph of Laura, big-bellied and wearing a youthful smile. A little 5-year-old Faye curiously resting her ear on the mom's tummy. It was a priceless image, and one that hadn't seen the light of day in decades. "Faye and I put this together, actually," she replied. "When she was very little. It made sense. Faye is one of the most talented arts and crafts hobbyists I've ever known." "So, what happened?" I asked. Laura looked over her shoulder and down the hall. She obviously feared that Faye would wake up. "His name is Christopher," she said, tears welling up in her eyes as she spoke. When she turned the page, there was a photo of Laura undergoing an ultrasound and giving a thumbs up. He was stillborn a little over a month before the due date. I had no idea what to say. I felt that saying "I'm sorry" was too empty, so I instead just remained silent. Placenta abruption, she continued. It's rare, but happens. She scooted closer to me on the couch and set the scrapbook on my lap, then grabbed my wrist. She said, Felix, Faye does not remember any of this. We have never, ever spoke of it. I asked her, how could that be possible, given that she was certainly old enough to remember an event like this? Laura explained that the emergency occurred while Greg was out with the girls. The paramedics rushed Laura to the hospital. The baby could not be saved. When she and Greg finally decided to break the news to their daughters that Christopher had died, Becca was heartbroken. But Faye didn't react. It was as if what they were telling her simply didn't register. Laura would say, do you understand that Christopher is never coming home? And Faye would respond, yes, Mommy, with a blank expression. This went on for weeks. Faye would occasionally ask about Christopher, if he'd be visiting soon. And then suddenly, she'd not remember anything about him, as if he never existed. She began to act out in school and would throw violent tantrums for no reason. A child psychologist warned that Faye was not handling the situation well. So Laura and Greg decided to spend several days up at the cabin with the girls in hopes of separating little Faye's mind from the heavy event. This is when it happened. Whatever it is that lives up in that forest up there, up in the trees or down in the hole, took notice of Faye. It wanted to learn more, but her little brain shut down in terror when it got too close. Laura said, after that day, Faye never spoke of Christopher again. It seems completely unaware that he ever existed. Quite suddenly, Faye's voice erupted from behind us. She was standing in the hallway, perhaps for a long time. I slammed shut the scrapbook. The air went out of the room. There was an agonizingly long moment of stillness. But during all of this, exchanged surprised looks. What's that? She finally asked, pointing to the scrapbook on my lap. It was useless, a deer in the headlights. Laura got between me and Faye, giving her a hug and asking how she was feeling. She said that they needed to talk, but Faye pushed her aside and walked over to the couch. Her fiery eyes locked on the scrapbook and didn't blink. She reached down and opened it. The page she revealed had a colorful cutout of the number 5. It was one of the final pages of the book. Her jaw trembled and tears instantly welled in her eyes. A look of excruciating pain fell over her face, and she began hyperventilating. Laura rounded the couch and tried to assuage her, but Faye slapped her hand away and grabbed the scrapbook, then raced off to the bedroom. She cried in there for hours and never let us in. The worst news. I spent the rest of the day alone. Faye never emerged from the bedroom. It wouldn't speak to me when I knocked. So I played Overwatch to distract myself from the horrible knot of stress in my stomach. Meanwhile, texting with my best friends Richard and Jason regarding the new developments. When I got up for a drink, I heard the bedroom door click. Faye was ready to let me in. She was sitting on the bed with the scrapbook in her lap when I pushed the door open. I said as gently as I could, "You want to talk about it?" Her face was streaked with hundreds of tears. Her skin was pale, her eyes lifeless. I had never seen her in such a state. I considered calling the paramedics for fear that she might hurt herself. Or me. She says, "I remember now." I stood there in the doorway, afraid to make a move. I wasn't sure how Faye would react to the knowledge that I had been conspiring with her mother about in the secret past. "Mom and I spent all summer getting the nursery set up," she said, tracing a finger over one of the photos. "Dad was so excited that he was finally going to have a son. So he did a sports theme." I walked over to the bed and sat down, quiet as a lamb, trying not to trigger another explosion. Faye kept her hands pressed on the scrapbook, as though she was feeling for a pulse. The colorful number 5 rested on the center of the page, laid over various photos. In one, there was a baseball mural painted on the wall with 5 players. In another, a toddler onesie designed with a baseball jersey. It displayed the number 5. "Hey, Mom." Faye started crying again and choked out. "Christopher was going to be the 5th member of the family." We talked for a long time. Mostly, Faye talked. I just quietly watched her face in awe as a deluge of ancient memories flooded her mind. Sometimes she could barely speak, but other times she shook her head and said it was all a dream. Her denial rose and fell in waves. She gasped at all the faded images in her head and tried to describe them to me with great strain. A tomb had been unearthed, and Faye was excavating it despite the pain it brought on her. All I could do was hold her hand through it. That night I made Nathan's tea again, and we both drank it. Faye fell asleep, and I stayed awake watching Netflix. Just as I was about to shut off the computer, I heard rustling outside, and the voice of a little girl said, "It's Faye. I can't see you. Who are you?" I walked down the hall and peered out the blinds in the living room. A dark figure walked right past the window, scaring me half to death. It came from our backyard, and no doubt had been standing outside our bedroom window. I ran down the hall and grabbed my sweats and shoes, then bolted to the door and looked all around the property. There, across the road, standing under the street lamp, was a man. His body glowed in the pale yellow light, but his face was totally black. He looked nearly 7 feet tall. One of his shoulders was notably higher than the other. His posture was rigid and reminiscent of the way Faye sleepwalked. I knew exactly who it was. I can't explain what prompted me to run after him, but I wanted to grab the thing by his neck and beat it to death with my bare hands. Perhaps it was because I was so tired, my fear instinct hadn't kicked in yet. Or perhaps I had just had enough. But instead of clawing me to death right there on the street, the figure turned and ran. I chased after him, screaming at the top of my lungs to stay the fuck away from my family and my house. The thing moved very fast, but limped with a freakish gait. My mind envisioned a rail-thin creature made of oily black parts, stretching on the costume of a human and graciously lurching around in it. This thing was not a person. Its movements were animalistic. Its strides were far too long. Its breath wheezed air like an antique accordion, and it stretched, and the stench that dragged behind it singed my nose. It smelled like a wildfire. "No woods for you to fuck around in out here," I screamed. Lights flickered on in houses all around me. As I chased the figure, it practically galloped. It was nearly 20 feet ahead of me. I chased it for 2 blocks. It rounded a few turns and finally bounded over a chain link fence into the community park where there were no lights. I couldn't see a damn thing, so I had run all the way around the other side to get in. The only thing I could see was a silhouette. A figure stood there in an empty field, shrouded in the night, gazing up at the moon. The silver outline of the body indicated that it was facing away from me. One of its hands twitched wildly. The other was gnarled up like driftwood. The sight of it out here, so far from help, unnerved me. I approached it still, committed to end this nightmare tonight, one way or another. My courage evaporated about 10 feet from the figure when it issued a growl I can't even explain. It was so deep I felt it in my rib cage as much as I heard it. I stopped in my tracks, but I still managed to say, "You will never take her. You will never have Faye. You will leave us alone forever. Go back to that fucking mountain and bury yourself in a mine." It growled again, then gurgled up a wet laugh. "What's your name?" it asked in my voice. It had been practicing. It was perfect now. "May I come in?" How do you carry on a conversation with an entity that is basically a demonic parrot? I said, much louder than before, "You will leave us alone and go back to the mountain. Faye will never be yours." The imposter emitted the shrieking of an infant. There we go. The sound startled me and felt so wrong coming out of the form of such a large man. Then it said in the voice of a child, "You will go down in the hole. That's where he'll put you." "Look at me, you piece of shit," I said. I tried to sound menacing, but in reality, I'm a coward. Most people can sense it. So there was little doubt the imposter knew it too. When it said something that I did not expect, the sound threw me off so much my head spun. "Tell me about the child," it said, in Nathan's voice, wafted gently from its throat. "Tell me about the child." Before I could speak, the imposter whirled around me and squared off with me. There were no words to express the combination of shock and instant despair that I felt. My knees came straight out from under my body, and I fell into the wet grass. Staring down at me, boring into me with lidless eyes, was the face of Nathan, my friend, my protector, the son of a man who had given his life to help me. Now his skin was hard and bruised, his scalp flayed, his eyes tormented. He had been stretched over a skull that didn't quite fit the body that rattled with loose, collected bones. A slimy black liquid dribbled down its arms. Perhaps it was blood. It was too dark to tell. It spoke a phrase in the language of Nathan's people, the same one Nathan had uttered over the phone last month, that made us sick. Then I began vomiting profusely as I lay there on the ground. "Tell me about the child," it said once more, then smiled. The lips spread and stretched with an expression of malevolent joy, bearing the rotten maw of a long-dead wolf. Hang on. Nathan's calm voice seeped out of it. "Let me speak to the one who followed you home." I gasped for air, but couldn't command my body to move. The creature took a few steps towards me, and I slammed my eyes shut, expecting to feel those hideous fangs in my neck. Instead, I heard its footsteps approach, then recede. Then recede in the opposite direction. When I opened my eyes, the imposter had stepped over me and was walking away. It was already in the distance, moving quickly back towards my neighborhood, towards my house. "Followed you home," it repeated, voice echoing in the cold night air. "Followed you home, followed you home." Taylor Jonathan, thank you. How are you doing? All right. Here's the finale. Oh God, it's a long one. All right, would you guys care if I went and smoked real quick? I'm one sub away from 1,000. I wasn't, but I guess I must have lost a sub. Oh, I lost a sub. Alright, guys. I will be in the chat. So we're almost done with the story. It's not quite as long as the last one. So good news there. But, yeah, so give me a minute. Let me just get it primed for when I get back. Alright, let me turn the music up a little bit and restart the tunes. Be right back. What's go outside, baby. Hello, everybody. I just got awesome news because my Mustang's about to pop a tire because my suspension is all jacked up. My roommate's gonna let me borrow his van for a couple weeks. His SUV, his Jeep. You think it's the autofocus messing with the chair? Maybe. Or maybe the imposter's coming to get me. Oh my god, I'm back! Alright. Here is the conclusion to the story right before bedtime, too. I go to bed at 9 o'clock. I'm an old man. Don't you judge me. I'm just kidding. Taylor, I'm not sure if you're a boy or a girl, but I said Bubba, and I apologize if you're not. I just say Bubba to everybody. Everybody's a Bubba. Dun, dun, dun. Let's finish this story. Maybe we can eke in another one. I saw one that I'd been reading a while ago. You're working old man. You're a working old man. Hey, I'm only 30. Hey Siri. How old am I?
You'll need to unlock your iPhone first.
Hey Siri. How old am I?
You're 38.
There you go. I'm 38. I'm a guy, but that's fine. It's like saying, dude. Common SoCal term. Oh, the SoCal, yeah. Southern California. We're gonna put on some Burt's Bees. Cause you know what? Feels good on the lips. Chattanooga Ed's a boy. Oh, Ed, if you're a boy, then I'm an infant. Oh, Ed, you know I love you, buddy. You and your red beard. How about them Chiefs, huh? They're killing it right now. I don't know if they won last night. I had to go to bed. Closer to 40 than I am. Don't you judge me. Anyways. This song is called Apprehensive at Best. And it just plays in my ear. I'm going to turn it down. There we go. Here is the link to the final part of this story. If you're at all interested in this story and you're finally just catching up, please go back and check out my live streams. My last few were... my last one wasn't about this story, but the ones before that, the last few were about this story. They lost, but that's okay. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, bud. They did play all right. Let's begin, shall we? This post is the remainder of the last update, which I broke into two pieces due to Reddit's length limitations. When I was 3 years old, my parents and I went to some family friends up in the mountains. One of the other family's kids was sick with some sort of flu. A few nights in, I came down with it and threw up everywhere, over and over. My father was so grossed out, his reaction made me cry. A lot. My mom had to kick him out of the room while she took care of me. His horrified expression imprinted in my mind forever and taught me that there was something terribly wrong with being sick. I'm 28 years old now. I'm 28 years old now. I'm not fooling anybody. And I spent the last years of my life, nope, I spent years of my life being absolutely paranoid about throwing up. Emetophobia. Emetophobia. Emetoph. That word controls so much of a person's existence. It makes you afraid to share someone's drink, afraid to eat without washing your hands, afraid to get on roller coasters, afraid to fly in planes, afraid to try new things. But at some point after decades with that phobia, you almost forget what caused you to regard all these things with fear. The possibility of vomiting becomes subconscious. You don't even think about it anymore. You're just afraid of virtually everything that could cause it. And yet, you have no immediate explanation of why you're afraid anymore. You just are. Although that possibility no longer lingers in the precipice of my conscious thoughts, the imposter found it. He went straight to the core of my being and saw what terrifies me the most. He brought it out and used it against me, reaping Nathan's spiritual purge chant. Didn't just disable me there in the field. It was a reminder of the creature's remarkable power to turn my own flawed humanity upon me. A reminder that was planning to make me suffer in the most personal of ways. The imposter was designing a personal hell for me. It was nearly ready to drag me down into it. Sorry, I got a text from my boss. A reminder that was planning to make me suffer in the most personal of ways. The imposter has designed a personal hell for me. It was nearly ready to drag me down into it. I had to reread that. So the world would collapse on me. I laid there on the ground, puking my guts out, knowing that my fiancée was asleep and unguarded in bed while a terrible being strode towards her through the dark. It called out her name in every voice familiar to her. It said things that would make her happy. It begged for help and mimicked the cries of children. It capitalized her innate motherly instincts on her buried memories and on the vulnerability of her unconscious state. And all I could do was stagger around and wait for the thrum of my heart. Damn it. I'm sorry. All I could do was stagger around and wait for the thrum of my death-gripped heart to subside. After a few moments, moonlight poured back into my vision, lighting the way out of the park. My pulse recovered from its frenzy, and the numbness of my limbs faded. The taste in my mouth for once didn't paralyze me. I tore through the streets to get back to my house. I had no plan. A lot of lights were on in the houses that lined the streets. Many of my neighbors had likely heard me screaming. I hoped this meant the imposter would think twice about moving around in the open beneath their watchful gazes. The front door of my house was wide open. It was pitch black inside. I shouted for Faye but couldn't find her. The bed was empty and disheveled, as though she had jumped out of it or had been dragged from it. A faint sound caught my attention, the sound of crying, and I struggled to determine where it came from. After looking in every room, I realized it was coming from outside. As I stepped out the sliding glass door in our bedroom that leads to the backyard, the sound grew louder and mixed with shuffling noises. There's a walkway that runs along the side of our house that connects the backyard to the front, and there in the darkness was Faye. She was sleepwalking in the most unusual manner I had ever seen. She stood high up on the balls of her feet, as before, but was bent over at the waist. Her hair and arms dangled lifelessly towards the ground. She shuffled toward the street where I'd first seen the shadowy figure. Faye's neck was craned in such a way that made a way that I could see her face swaying just outside her left thigh. Two mournful eyes peered up at me from it, and her lips trembled as she cried. I couldn't tell if she was conscious or not. She mumbled something, but with her cries I couldn't make out what she was saying. I wrapped my arms around her waist and literally carried her inside. She clawed at me and landed a tiger bomb to my crotch. Just as we careened into the living room, a police car drifted by, its lights tracing all across the houses. I gently closed the door and peered outside the window. It took me a moment to see it, but in the trees in the front yard, a dark form was crouched on the thickest branch. I yanked the curtains down over the blinds. Faye and I remained awake for the rest of the night until dawn. Come on, man, read it. We heard footsteps on our roof and in the attic, but no voices. On 2 occasions, someone knocked gently on the front door, and once on the sliding glass in the back, but we remained in the living room. We communicated only through pen and paper, and prevented each other from nodding off and dreaming about the scrapbook or about Christopher. The last thing she wrote was, "Got an idea. Explain tomorrow." At about 6 a.m., my cell phone buzzed on the table, and I'd been quiet. All had been quiet for the past few hours. Faye and I were almost done with the second Lord of the Rings movie when I grabbed my phone. I was surprised to see it was the ranger from Pikes Peak. His name is Greg, same as Faye's dad. So I just refer to him by title in these posts. We hadn't spoken a while. I immediately feared that his call was confirming the grim likelihood that Nathan was dead. He skipped all pleasantries and said, "You better sit down." A nauseous fear crept to my throat. When he said that, I shook my head and replied, Just tell me. Just tell me." Static began to form around my peripheral vision, which happens when I'm feeling faint. If it grows and covers my entire field of view, I pass out. The ranger cleared his throat and tried to speak with composure, but I could hear on his voice that he had been crying and said, "We got a call from Nathan, one of Nathan's relatives. Said he'd been missing for a few days. Thought he went camping up with his buddies, but none of them knew where he was. On my routine this morning, I dropped by Faye's folks' cabin. There was a long silence which told me everything I needed to know. But then the ranger said more. We got the cops everywhere up here now. The whole mountain's shut down. They've still got Tai Wei listed as a missing person, but now they're out hunting for a body. Like they mean it this time. Looking for a murderer too, but I interrupted him and demanded to know why. There was no way I could hide the frantic anxiety any longer. The ranger said, "Something's happened up here, up in the cabin. They did something to him. I don't know how to tell you." He paused again, struggled to hold back tears. I crumpled to the floor while he spoke. The news singed every nerve in my body. Pain radiated up from my stomach across every limb. My scalp tingled. The static grew in my vision. "I need to know," I said. The ranger insisted that the details were unnecessary, but I begged him. What I'm about to tell you is a paraphrasing of what the ranger said. Some of this info might change as the Denver coroner performs an official autopsy, but this is what we know. The bathroom window of the cabin had been forced open from the outside, but also the front door was unlocked and slightly open when the ranger arrived. The bedroom door was locked from the inside. It appeared that two people, one of them Nathan, had been staying inside the cabin for 2 or 3 nights. Nathan's satellite phone was found inside, my number being the last one dialed. It was unclear whether Nathan was present at the cabin when we last spoke, when he promised he wouldn't go to the cabin. There was a buck knife jammed into one of the walls, and many unusual symbols and words had been carved all over the hallway leading from the living room to the bathroom. To the bedroom, I apologize. There were words in Hopi, the language Nathan's people spoke, and Zuni, the language they did not. The words haven't been translated yet. There was a carving of a large dream catcher on the outside of the bedroom door, and a non-lethal amounts of blood spattered on the carpet and lower wall opposite of said door. On the inside of the bedroom door there was a small marks everywhere, as though someone had been pounding very hard on it. The ranger and sheriff speculated that Nathan sat on the floor of the hallway for several hours, or perhaps the entire day. Someone was in the bedroom, but the door remained locked. It's possible that they had a long conversation. At no point was the electricity or heat functioning in the cabin, because it had been shut off after I rescued on my second visit. This meant that however long Nathan stayed, he remained in the dark and freezing weather each night. 2 pairs of tracks were found leaving the cabin, one from the bedroom window, the other from the front door, heading into the forest out back. The tracks joined together, indicating that the 2 people walked side by side in the woods. Nathan's body was found by the ranger's dogs approximately a quarter mile in, buried upside down with his legs erupting from the soil at the knee. Upon exhumation, before being taken out, it was discovered that Nathan's face and scalp had been flayed or mutilated. There were deep lacerations in his back that appeared to be from claws, and carvings on his arms that looked self-inflicted. The unofficial cause of death, however, was suffocation. He had been buried alive. Oh, and everything in the cellar was gone. It was completely empty. It never comes so close to ending my own life. The guilt and horror I felt at hearing the ranger's words are still ineffable, so I won't bother trying to document them. Somehow, I convinced myself that there would be a time for grieving in the future. And even for the acts of penance. But right now, I need to focus on Faye. After all, she might end up like Nathan and Tai Wee if we didn't figure out what to do. A few days passed with no strange activity beyond a voice here and there. I was hesitant to let Faye sleep for fear that she would dream of her little brother and give the imposter what he sought. But she explained to me her idea. A plan to get rid of the creature once and for all. And for the first time in months, I actually felt a glimmer of hope. We kept drinking Nathan's tea after concluding that it was doing no discernible harm. And Faye spent the days furiously drawing, journaling, and texting with her mom and sister. I called Angela, the Shoshone woman, and requested that she come visit us with her hypnotist friend and speak with Faye again, and to bless our new house. I also made as large as a donation I could afford to Tai Wee and Nathan's community to help cover the cost of their funeral ceremonies. In my spare time in the evenings, I wrote a letter for both of them. I intended to read it at their place of burial someday. Each night, Faye went to bed crying. She had definitely entered some kind of mourning process, long delayed by years of denial, and now bore witness to the lifelong impact of her loss. Never have I seen a human in so much pain, but Faye assured me that she would be all right, and that I should have faith in her. I silently obliged. Because I trusted her more than anyone in the world. She knows herself, and I put my faith in that. One night I snuck into the bedroom and retrieved Faye's drawings. She had produced several pictures of her own nightmares, of memories from her childhood, and of a young man that looked like her. I believe he's Christopher, or at least how Faye imagines he might look. He had survived and grown up. She wrote all kinds of things about his drawings, about the drawings. Mostly detailed description of the images, sometimes stories from when he was young, and wrote her brother's name dozens of times. She even drew a family portrait that included herself at age 5 holding a smiling baby. On the 5th night after the incident in the park, Angela and her hypnotist friend arrived. As I've mentioned before, I haven't given the hypnotist's name because I don't want to try to keep track of too many people. Faye informed our guests that she believed we could get rid of the entity for good. I went outside and set the drawings under the tree in the front yard, where I'd last seen the shadowy figure. When we got Faye comfortable and set her up on the couch, fortunately for us, Faye has the remarkable ability to be able to fall asleep at any time and any place. So all we had to do was dim the lights in the house. I made a pasta dish for everyone. Within a half hour, she was out cold. This time she didn't drink Nathan's tea. For a long time, Angela, the hypnotist, and I sat at the kitchen table over coffee and ice cream. We kept our voices low and discussed all the recent events related to the cabin, watching for the imposter to show up. The hypnotist was especially interested in the dream catchers and wanted to know who made them. I told her I didn't have any idea, and that at first I thought the entity itself created them. After speaking with you no sleepers, the people in the Reddit post, you are more insightful than I am. I started to believe that someone had summoned or was controlling the entity with the original Dreamcatcher. Then when it broke, I realized it was protecting me. She said, "Do you think it's possible one of her family members created it, or the ranger? Do you trust them?" Many people have speculated that Tywee and Nathan were not honest with me, or not who they said they were, but I honestly hadn't considered that the ranger himself could be behind all of this. I conceded that it was possible. Faye spoke a few times in her sleep. She laughed and said things like, "Do you need help with that?" And, "What the hell are you doing?" After she said the name of her boss, I realized she was dreaming about work. We waited until after midnight, but by then no activity had occurred, or no sounds were coming from outside. Angela woke up Faye and said, "We need to take a more direct approach." The two women propped Faye up, hospital bed style, and began to hum a beautiful song. Angela intermittently spoke in her native tongue and traced lines with fingers across Faye's forehead. The hypnotist occasionally raised her hands in the air and touched Faye's shoulders. After several minutes, my fiancée went limp. Her head slumped back on the couch and her arms dangled to the floor. Finally, she opened her eyes, which were now rolled back in her head. She began to breathe rhythmically. The hypnotist said, "Who are you?" She replied simply, "Faye." "Are you alone?" "I'm with you." "Who else is here?" "Angela, Felix, Erica." That's her boss. The hypnotist corrected Faye and said Erica isn't here anymore. It's just us four. Faye looked puzzled for a moment and then said, "Okay." Angela joined the conversation and touched Faye's arm. She asked, "The one who follows you, the one who calls out to you in the night, where is he now? Is he here?" Faye's head craned from side to side like she was emptying water from her ears, and then replied, "No." "Where is he?" Faye sat motionless for what felt like a whole minute, then finally said, "Across the dark." The hypnotist then said, "Faye, can you call out to him? Can you ask him to come here?" She remained silent. The hypnotist asked again. Faye forcefully said, "No." Angela said, "Honey, we can't get rid of him unless you bring him here." Faye began to whimper. Her mouth trembled, and she uttered, in a voice of a small child, "Please, no." Goosebumps rippled across my arms as I sat at the table watching. Angela implored, and Faye began to cry. "You have to call out to him," the hypnotist repeated. "Tell him where you are." Faye slowly rocked her head back and forth and tried to reach up in the air to protect herself. But the weight of her hypnotic state kept her in place. Suddenly, her body went stiff and her eyes rolled forward. They landed squarely on me. Then looked over my shoulder and focused on something 1,000 miles away. Her mouth opened slightly, and a gurgling sound came from her throat, and said, in a wet and masculine voice, "Watch you. Watch you." Faye leaped off the couch and shuddered, as though she were trying to throw something off her back. Her body stayed rigid, and she turned and faced away from us. Every joint in her limbs popped with sickening cracks. She bent her head back and stared up at the place where the ceiling met the wall in front of her, then tightly balled her fist again. "Watch you, watch you, watch you." The hypnotist and Angela were standing now, gathering around Faye to prevent her from hurting herself or dashing off into the night. I played safe a few feet away, trying to be ready for anything. The hypnotist said, "Faye, tell us where he is." She breathed hard through gritted teeth and forced out the word, "Bedroom." We all turned and looked behind us. Down the dark hall, the hypnotist wrapped her hand around Faye's forehead from behind and started whispering in her ear. I turned quietly and moved down the hall towards the bedroom. As I approached it, I could hear the sliding glass door to the yard open. When I stepped into our bedroom, a cold breeze was blowing into it. The glass door on the opposite wall was wide open. I looked around to make sure I wasn't about to get ambushed, and then approached the door. The backyard light was motion censored. That automatically activates when something moves. It was off. The yard was dark. However, at the far end of the yard, I could make out the shape of a man. The same figure that I'd seen a week earlier. The one I'd make the dire mistake of chasing after. This time the figure was even larger than before. It appeared to stand roughly 7 feet tall. It faced away from us as always, and its head was cocked towards the moon. Its hands lay pressed against its sides, fist balled, tightly clutching many pieces of paper. Faye's drawings. It growled, "Wol my, wol my." I slid the door shut as fast as I could and locked it, then raced back into the living room. Faye was now sitting on the couch, head still, craned up towards the ceiling, with Angela and the hypnotist speaking to her. They implored her to wake up, but it seemed as though she was struggling to return. Outside, a voice howled. It sounded like a little girl crying out for her mother. Another voice erupted, Laura's, shouting, "Greg, we need to take her to the hospital." Faye began to convulse. So the two women clutched her tightly and began and begged her to wake up. An infant began to shriek in the yard, and then it slowly moved to the side of the house, to the front door. There was a loud, slow knock, followed by more voices. The knocks repeated over and over. Becca's voice called out from behind the door. "Faye, where are you? Help me! Please help!" At last, Faye sucked at a huge breath and leaned back on the couch. Her head returned to a normal position, and she stood there, frantically trying to collect herself. The pounding on the door grew louder. The voices began to overlap, as though several people were standing in the front of our house, crying out to the night. She said breathlessly, "It's here. It's here." And looked at me. In Faye's eyes, I saw uncertainty and terror, mirrors of my own state. But then a look of conviction fell over her face. The fear seemed to evaporate right off. A man began to cry just outside the door. It said in Greg's voice, "He was my child too, Laura, my son. Do you think a weekend in the goddamn mountains would make me forget?" Faye gasped. His words were so perfectly clear that I nearly believed he was on the other side of the door. "Don't you fucking dare," Laura's voice shouted. "Just let her forget. Let her forget. This doesn't have to be her burden too." Faye burst into tears and wobbled to the door. She rested her face against it and reached for the knob. The shrieks of a baby echoed through the house, followed by a little girl saying, "What's your name? I can't see you." "It's Faye. Faye." I watched my fiancée collapse to the floor in despair. Angela and the hypnotist took steps forward, but Faye put her hand in the air to halt them. She sat on the ground, leaned back against the door, and brushed the strawberry locks from her face. The door knocked again. My own voice followed it, saying, "May I come in? It's freezing out here. Another storm's coming tonight." "I have to tell you something," said Faye, gently knocking on the door. "I know what you really want." The voice fell silent all at once, and only an uneven breathing remained. "I had a baby brother," she said. "His name was Christopher. He was number 5. The breath cut out. Faye knocked on the door again, and after a minute, something knocked back. "I remember you now," she continued. "I couldn't remember for years, or I guess I didn't want to. It's easier for me to just pretend things never happened. Some kids make things exist. Friends, monsters, places. But I made Christopher not exist. That way I didn't have to lose him. His death was just make-believe." A long, slow scratching noise resounded through the door. The thing outside was dragging a claw across the wood, like it was drawing a picture. Faye put her palm on the door and felt the weak vibrations of the scratching. For a long time, the number was all I could remember. I knew it meant something more, but every time I thought about it, my whole body would hurt. I'd feel sick, and then I'd just fall asleep. Or if I was dreaming, I'd just wake up. I always knew it meant something more. The doorknob rattled, and a wet, clunking sound emitted from it. The imposter was gnawing on the door from the other side. The clatter of 100 jagged teeth rose in vile symphony across the living room. He was stillborn. Do you know what that is? He died inside my mom. All this time, I've avoided burying Christopher, but you finally helped me realize why it's time I laid him to rest. Faye, come hold him. Becca's voice called out. I don't get it. He falls asleep so fast when you've got him. You want her to be your new mommy, Caleb? The scratching noises persisted. Faye wiped tears from her eyes and took a deep breath. Now you know everything I wanted you to know. A chorus of voices rang out in the night. An infant screamed. A toddler cried. Greg and Laura, Becca, Tywee, and Nathan, the ranger all spoke at once. Decades of pain washed through the door. Words of anguish and sorrow cried. Words of anguish and sorrowful cries drowned all the other sounds in the room. Angela, the hypnotist, and I exchanged terrified glances. But Faye remained motionless at the door, staring up to my eyes. She didn't blink. The knocking on the door swelled to a violent pounding. The entity used every possible trick it could. It tried to hit her where the wounds were fresh, and tried to tear open old scars. But Faye never budged. She held her ground emotionally. She never took her eyes off of me. They were filled with a knowing calm, as if to say, enough. When the imposter got no response, it stomped from the front door to the nearby window. It towered over us and blocked out the moonlight that lit up the drapes. A huge shadow fell across Faye as she sat there unmoved. Woe my, it growled. Faye's lips quivered as she said nothing. A titanic scream erupted from the creature, and it slapped the glass with the open hand. The sound shook our home, and it struck a lightning bolt of terror in the pit of my stomach. But Faye did not react. She didn't even flinch. Then the entity said something I did not expect. Instead of assuming the voice of someone we know, it spoke in several I did not recognize. It spoke only one labored sentence, but each word it uttered was in a different tongue. I walked 1,000 years across the dark to find you. A small part of me wanted to run away screaming, but I was so afraid my legs wouldn't even move. The finality, the longing of what it said was so incomprehensibly dreary. I totally lost my nerve. That moment, another thing even less expected happened. The shadow receded from the window, coloring Faye's face silver with the dim kiss of moonlight. Sullen footsteps dragged across our front yard and vanished into the backdrop of the cricket songs. After a while, we were there alone. All three of us looked down at Faye, and relieved smile across her face. She wasn't crying anymore. It's been several days since the imposter left. It returned once only to sing us the morose lullaby. Soul me, ah do. I'm a naked soul me, ah do. Faye slept through the entirety. I didn't mention it to her. My fiancée has been sleeping well since that night. She hasn't talked at all, and certainly hasn't sleepwalked. In fact, she hasn't even really been tossing and turning like she normally does. As if its dreadful weight was lifted from her shoulders. During the days she cries, she cuddles with me and talks about her childhood. She Skypes with her mom and sister. They cry too. I've shed many tears with her and for her loss, but I understand now what she did. Faye never dreamed of Christopher, only of the number 5 as a child. She repressed the memory and pain of his death and thus forgot about him. That number became the lockbox in which she was hidden. He was hidden. It was the coffin she buried with him. And she buried him so deep within herself, she couldn't even remember him in her nightmares. This is why the entity never fully understood what she was hiding. And that is why it never gained full access to her. Faye's lifelong sleep disturbances were her mind's attempts at keeping her, that welling pain, repressed. But by talking in her sleep, she invited dark attention to herself. If you speak long enough into the void, someone is bound to start listening. Someone or something heard Faye's pain and saw it as a weakness. It saw those cracks in her heart as a passage into her soul, and it chose her. The imposter came transfixed with my fiancée, not because she was an easy target, but because she was a monolithic puzzle box of torment, a challenge, a worthy opponent. I remembered early on in these stories that one thing I loved most about Faye is her intelligence. She has an artistic creativity that allows her to see things in ways I do not. She realized that the imposter knew it could tug her like a puppet by delving into the darkest parts of her mind. In all those hidden places, there were weapons to use against her, to weaken her, to wear her down. But instead of burying her secrets deeper, she unearthed them and brought them into the light by moving Christopher and the number that represented him from her subconscious into her waking thoughts. Faye unleashed a tidal wave of forgotten pain upon herself, but also she took away the imposter's powers over her. She cut off her own puppet strings, and now there was nothing left for the creature to grab onto, and so it left. I've also shed tears for my dear friends, Tyway and Nathan. Perhaps I can never convey the warmth of their personalities and the sincerity of their hearts, but I trusted them entirely. I do not believe that they were anything to do with the foul thing that stalked my fiancée for all these years. Their deaths are mortal wounds on my heart, and I will carry the agony of their loss. I want it to hurt as a permanent reminder. They have given so much to me and asked nothing in return, only that I preserve the goodness of their people in my memory. By writing about their altruism and sacrifices, I'm trying to fulfill that promise. May their spirits live on in the sacred land they protected. We may blah, blah, blah. Words are hard. We may never know for sure who built the dream catcher at the cabin, or the one in the trees outside of my old home. Right now, I believe that they were built by different people who lived on Pikes Peak. Some of them wanted to protect fools like me who ventured to that mountain without understanding its significance to the Indians living there. Others perhaps wish to harm them. Maybe even Angela herself built one of them. Maybe you can't tell the person they're designed to protect, or else it doesn't work. Faye's ring has also been the topic of heated debate. Whether or not it's cursed, what should be done with it, etc. For now, my fiancée does not wish to part with it, but she might consider it anything happens to it. If it's still a precious family heirloom and the symbol of my devotion, whatever taint it may carry. I guess what I mean is, we still don't have the answers. And the unfortunate thing is that we may never. The true nature of the entity and the full explanation of what happened to us remain a mystery. But in time, I believe, I will come to understand more of this terrible ordeal. We plan to head back to Colorado in a few weeks to spend time with Faye's parents, to pay our deepest respects to Tai Wei and Nathan's community, and to witness the bulldozing of the cabin, whatever secrets it still hides. Let them be buried deep beneath the rubble and the snows for decades to come. Thank you, no sleep. FB. So that is Felix Blackwell's story. So there you go. That was a long one. You're very welcome, Alice. Thank you for sending it to me. Is our new friend still here? There he is. That was so long. You're telling me I had to read it. You're very welcome. Taylor, I'm not sure if you're interested, but in the description down below is my Discord. And you could find me in there. That was my pen I was playing with. There it is. I don't know if y'all get that sound. Let me see. Is my processor working overtime? Let's see. Test, 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 test. I don't know. Oh, I think I might have turned it off. Let me see. Nope, no, it's on. So you're probably getting some of it. Yeah, so that's the story. And it's 9:26. It's past my bedtime. It's like 9:30. But I told you guys I would stream, and I did. So, there you go. I want to thank you all very much for coming. And I want to give a big shout out to my members. Chattanooga Ed, you're one of them. Oh, hell. Let me see here. Ah! I can't find it. Give me a second. Here we go. All my members. Dark Fruit Dolls, Majora, EXP, Alex's Aquatics, Magenta Cherry, Fishroom Fever, Dizzy Dave, Mismatched Socks, Dan Slee, Cynthia McKee, Priscilla MK, Jess Shrimp Granny, Amy Excelsior, Chattanooga Ed, Loic RC, the Zen Ginger. Thank you all for being members. Y'all are helping me out. Thank you all for suffering through my poorly said story. It's hard to do these stories in just one go. What am I doing drinking Pepsi right before bed? And thank you, Taylor Jonathan, for becoming a ghoul. Well, there we go. We got a new member. Very awesome. Very, very awesome. Make sure you put those new emotes to test. You like the badges? Yeah. And if y'all have ideas for more badges, just let me know in the Discord. I think I can fit a couple more. Oh, my little zombie guy. So we're gonna get out of here. Once again, thank you all very much for coming. I might try to do another stream tomorrow night. I had a lot of fun with that. Keep your eyes peeled for great stories and send them to me in Discord. That was a good one. Oh, Yandere, why the frown? You know I love you. There we go. We're blowing up the with the emotes. That's awesome. When this baby gets long enough, I'm gonna braid it. I'm gonna braid it into my hair. No, I'm not. Oh, guys. Hey, we're back to 1,000. It's like I'm at 1,000. I'm at like 1,010, and then I'm down to 900. Yeah, and guys, please. Chattanooga Ed is an awesome streamer. He streams with Fishroom Fever. Please check out his channel. And until next time, guys, be creepy. Have a wonderful night. And again, thank you for coming.